ever wondered what else was going on in the year you were born? You may have heard about some of it from your parents or radio or television, but you've never seen all of it collected together in one programme. 1984 in Britain was the year of the miners' strike, with angry fights between striking miners and police. It was also the year of the Brighton bomb, when the IRA nearly succeeded in killing the Prime Minister, Mrs. Thatcher. There were important scientific discoveries too. This was the year they discovered the AIDS virus and the greenhouse effect, and for the first time, man walked in space. One thing you would have recognised was News at 10, which was reporting on all these events every night. So let's go back to the year that you were born. The voice of Arthur Scargill, the man at the centre of 1984's long-running and most bitter struggle, the miners' strike. He'd been a miner since the age of 15, and conflict with the newly elected National Coal Board chairman, Ian McGregor, seemed inevitable. McGregor, the victim of angry demonstrations, soon found there was no way of breaking down the barriers between him and the miners' union. This is where the strike started. Corton Wood Colliery, an uneconomic pit in South Yorkshire, was to be closed. The time was ripe for confrontation, and the miners struck to save their jobs. Welsh, Scottish and Yorkshire miners all immediately came out in support, and at a mass rally in Sheffield, Scargill said there would be no national ballot. The Nottinghamshire miners' leaders had not brought their men out, and two of them, Henry Richardson and Ray Chadburn, were manhandled by the crowd.
Look, clear off, it's all being distorted. Take the bloody things away.
Soon, miners were travelling south to try and prevent the Notts miners going to work, but the police turned them back. Hundreds of police reinforcements were sent north as the prospect of violence grew. Coal stocks showed little sign of diminishing as the strike continued, and the power stations were still working. As power cuts did not materialise, the strikers turned their attention to the steel workers, but were unsuccessful in trying to prevent deliveries of coal to the plants. Finally, the frustration exploded into violence.
At Orgreave Coking Works, Mr. Scargill rallied his men. What followed was the country's worst picket line confrontation for 60 years.
Scargill was quick to condemn the police.
I've seen them charging through right here with long staves, beating people to the ground. Yes, there's violence. Police violence on a scale I can't see.
Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister, condemned the rioters.
I must tell you that what we've got is an attempt to substitute the rule of the mob for the rule of law.
Many were arrested, including Scargill himself.
1984, Great Britain.
Meanwhile, some miners continued working.
In August, the pickets rushed to stop the first Yorkshire miner returning to work. At Gascoigne Wood near Selby, they very nearly succeeded.
Peace talks between McGregor and Scargill took place later in the year, but the dispute carried on into 1985, when the miners returned with dignity, but not victory. At GCHQ, the top-secret monitoring centre, the government banned union membership. But neither strikes nor government policy seemed able to stop the rise in unemployment.
To have over 3 million people unemployed in this country is bad enough. But to suggest, as some of our opponents have, that we don't care about it is as deeply wounding as it is utterly false.
The government were proud, however, of spreading share ownership with their sale of British Telecom to the public. America was running up the biggest national debt in its history, but the dollar was strong and 6.5 million new jobs were created, all of which helped Ronald Reagan to win a second term as president.
ain't seen nothing yet.
His opponent was Walter Mondale, but the Democrat leader never managed to convince the public that he was a winner.
Reagan's victory when it came was almost an anticlimax. But as 1984 drew to a close, the old year mapped out the problems ahead for the new. Even so, for Reagan's people, 1984 had been a year to celebrate.
Meanwhile, terrorism reached the streets of London with the Libyan embassy siege.
It began with a routine demonstration by Libyan exiles outside the Libyan People's Bureau in St. James's Square. A hail of shots was fired from inside the bureau. Policewoman Yvonne Fletcher fell fatally wounded, hit in the chest. She died before she reached hospital. Police marksmen surrounded the square, but they couldn't move on the building. The occupants had diplomatic immunity. But for 10 days, the siege continued. Then, on Friday, April the 27th, the negotiator led the Libyans out of the building. The killer of WPC Fletcher was being allowed to go free. The price Britain had to pay for the safety of her subjects in Libya.
And terrorists struck again when the IRA tried to wipe out the British government by planting a bomb at the Grand Hotel in Brighton during the Conservative Party conference week. At 2:54 a.m. on Friday, October the 12th, the explosion ripped through 5 floors, killing 5 people and injuring 31. The Prime Minister and most of her cabinet colleagues escaped the blast, although the Trade and Industry Secretary Norman Tebbit was amongst the injured, and his wife Margaret was left permanently paralysed. Many of the guests who escaped the blast helped care for the bewildered injured, as firemen carried out rescue operations within the wrecked hotel. Harvey Thomas, the conference organizer, was freed after being trapped under masonry for over an hour.
I'm not hurt. I was in my room, which was, but the Prime Minister's bathroom was completely destroyed, and the Foreign Secretary's sitting room. Right way, please. Right way.
Prime Minister, could you tell us how you are, please?
Very much. Our worry is, when you hear about these atrocities, these bombs, you don't expect them to happen to you. But life must go on as usual.
The party conference did carry on, business as usual, as the Grand Hotel was pulled down so that it could be rebuilt. More violence abroad, where the Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, was assassinated. Mrs. Gandhi, seen here at the Commonwealth Conference, was killed by 2 of her Sikh bodyguards. This caused widespread anti-Sikh rioting. But Bishop Desmond Tutu was rewarded for his efforts to bring peace to South Africa. He was given the Nobel Peace Prize for his crusade against racial segregation. But he warned his congregation that the struggle was far from over.
And we ask our fellow South Africans who happen to be white, please, if you think you can stop us from becoming free, you are going to be stampeded.
The tragedy of Bhopal started here at the Union Carbide industrial plant. Without warning, one December night, a poisonous gas leaked from the factory. Bewildered townspeople, not knowing why they felt unwell, gathered as first symptoms of the poison were treated. Quickly, emergency rations were handed out to children whose parents were ill. Thousands upon thousands of victims who could still walk kept on arriving at the emergency treatment centres. Others had to be carried. Hundreds of doctors from all over India arrived in the area to deal with the initial symptoms, temporary blindness and breathing difficulties. Yet initially, the doctors did not even know what poisons had been inhaled. For over 2,000 people, treatment came too late, the hospital gardens becoming a temporary morgue. The tragedy of Bhopal is still with the townspeople today. Tuberculosis, kidney and liver damage caused by the unseen killer have claimed many more victims since that poisonous night. Back in Britain, 2 famous buildings were damaged by fire. York Minster was partially destroyed in July when the roof of the south transept burnt down, causing £1 million worth of damage. And the major soundstage at Pinewood Film Studios was burnt down after a gas explosion on the set of the film Legends. The studio was soon back in operation, however, shooting a new James Bond film in 1985. But perhaps the biggest single disaster of 1984 was the suffering of children in the Ethiopian famine. It made a deep impression on people in the well-fed Western world. Thoughts of help were soon put into action by pop stars Bob Geldof and Midge Ure, who together with fellow rock singers produced the charity record Do They Know It's Christmas? The disc became the UK's biggest ever seller, and much-needed food and supplies were sent to the starving as a result. Those were the major things that were happening in the year you were born. But down here in the ITN film vaults, there's much more. Like, who were the big names in sport? What scientific discoveries were being made? What was fashionable? And what was making people laugh? Some will seem very familiar, some very different. So let's go back and take a closer look. Captain Bruce McCandless became the first man to walk untethered in space, far above the Earth. His backpack cost £8 million to develop. And another flight that entered the record books was that of Joe Kittinger, with the first solo balloon crossing of the Atlantic. A cheaper way of making the crossing had been ushered in by People Express, and their £99 flight to New York was soon matched by Virgin. But space technology had also made possible satellite television, and Britain's first satellite channel got off the ground this year. It was supplied to viewers by cable. Some people decided they'd had too much television, and a small town in America switched off for a month. The children found it quite a sacrifice.
I cut down on some shows, but I don't think it was good to stop TV this month. What they're trying to say is not watch the junk shows. There's some educational shows on TV, and those are the ones I watched.
New technology was transforming household finances. You could use computer keyboards to get out cash, buy shares, and even pay bills without leaving home. While the hologram, once just a novelty, made its first appearance on check cards to stop fraud. Scientists also came up with the first ever solid paint. You could now decorate the living room without getting your ball gown dirty. Or you could let a machine do your painting for you. This was the winning entry in the first exhibition of computer art. 200 artists took part. The electronic revolution produced a whole new generation of robots that would respond to spoken commands.
5. Return.
This robot could turn a dice to any face that the operator asked for.
6. Return.
And robots could now talk themselves, or even tell jokes and sing. There was no problem about asking Sammy to play it again.
I'm Sammy. You know, New York has got to be one of the most exciting cities in the world. The loveliness of Paris seems somehow sadly gay.
Another robot voice of 1984 came from the Christmas present, the Hero Jr., described by its makers as a friendly robot that could help with the housework or entertain children. The price tag was £1,400. Even dearer was this model of Stephenson's rocket. At more than £25,000, it was the most expensive mechanical toy ever sold at auction. Another replica launched this year was a half-sized copy of the Cutty Sark. It was built by a Scottish businessman who even made his own sails. Her maiden voyage was a 16-day trip from London to Canada and then on to South America. A reconstruction of an even older ship was the 52-foot galley, the Argo. Her 3,000-mile voyage from Greece to the Black Sea was inspired by the ancient Greek legend of Jason and the Argonauts. But wasn't all that rowing rather boring?
Oh yes, it's the most boring thing you can imagine.
In fact, nostalgia seemed to be in the air in 1984. The Royal Mail celebrated their 200th anniversary with a stagecoach run from Bristol to London. A rather younger birthday was that of the Mini, the car described by its designer as a box with a wheel at each corner. It was still going strong after 25 years. As was Marks & Spencer, celebrating its centenary. The store chain had come a long way from the days when Mr. Marks put up a sign on his market stall saying, "Don't ask the price, it's a penny." And it was 100 years since a Jack Russell Terrier first heard his master's voice. HMV brought in an identical dog called Toby for the occasion. It was also a great year for comebacks. London Zoo launched a campaign to reintroduce red squirrels, which hadn't been seen in England since the Second World War. And British Rail tried to bring back the advanced passenger train with its unique tilting carriages. But even at slower speeds, it still wouldn't work and eventually had to be scrapped. And it was a year for facelifts. The Pigeon's favourite target, Nelson's Column, was having a wash and brush up. The company, who've looked after the Admiral for more than 90 years, have to clear a lot of pigeon droppings.
2 years ago, we took away about 300 weight, and the time before, 1,000 weight.
And the Statue of Liberty in New York was showing signs of wear and tear. Her copper skin was okay, it was her steel bones that were crumbling. Her torch, which was once a beacon of hope across the Atlantic, was in danger of falling into it. So, a £25 million refit began, which was to last 2 years. And another famous lady who got a new look was Mrs. Thatcher. This was the third waxwork of the ex-Prime Minister to appear in Madame Tussauds. She said it was better than the last one.
We almost held a cabinet here, couldn't we?
It was also the third time that a new likeness of the Queen appeared on coins. Some people couldn't tell many differences. The designer disagreed.
I mean, if you can't see them, I feel sorry for you.
But the old £1 note disappeared. The bank stopped printing as they switched over to coins. And so did the halfpenny, which was no longer legal tender. The tiny coin was introduced when the currency went decimal in 1971. Farewell, too, to Terry Wogan, at least for radio listeners.
Wow! You have to jump in the air when you do that. But that was...
He bowed out of his Radio 2 show after 12 years to start a new career in television.
This is it, hey, listen, I brought something for you.
Huh?
Yeah, suit you, darling.
Thank you.
Yeah, here you go.
The only way to talk to Jimmy Young is with a rose in your teeth.
Could you perhaps...
But one newcomer to the scene was David Kid Jensen. He was brought in by Independent Radio to present its new pop chart show, challenging the BBC monopoly for the first time. One old faithful from charts gone by was former Beatle Paul McCartney. He received the freedom of the city of Liverpool, while his hometown also celebrated the group's heyday with a new Beatles museum, including a replica of the Cavern Club, where the Fab Four started. Called Beatles City, it cost £2 million, partly paid for by the local council. More up to date were Michael Jackson, who made a new kind of record by winning 8 Grammy Awards in a year.
And Boy George, another icon of the times, especially in America.
Oh, I think he's sexy.
Really?
Nice.
Hey, I'm really up for it, you know? Up for it, man.
I love him. I love him.
But the busiest pop star of the year was Elton John. A big concert at Wembley, a wedding, a trip to Poland, where he met Lech Wałęsa, and finally, the disappointment of watching his football club Watford crash to Everton in the cup final. The Olympic 3,000-metre final ended in tears too for Mary Decker, who tripped over the heels of the South African-born British runner Zola Budd. These Olympics, held in Los Angeles amid typical Hollywood hype, were boycotted by Russia and the rest of Eastern Europe in retaliation for the American boycott of Moscow 4 years earlier. So it wasn't surprising that the Americans did well, though no one disputed the achievement of Carl Lewis, who won 4 gold medals. But Britain's Sebastian Coe recovered from 2 years of illness and injury to beat Steve Cram in the 1,500 metres. Daley Thompson retained his decathlon title easily. Britain's ice skaters, Torvill and Dean, brought gold medals back to their hometown of Nottingham. They'd taken just about every skating honour in the book. The 130th boat race had to be postponed after the Cambridge crew ran into a barge during a practice run and damaged their boat beyond repair. Oxford went on to win the race the next day in a record time of 16 minutes and 45 seconds. A record too for John Francombe, who became the most successful jump jockey ever, riding his 1,036th winner. And a course record at St Andrews for Sevi Ballesteros. It was his second Open title. At Wimbledon, Jimmy Connors was beaten by John McEnroe in the men's singles. And Martina Navratilova won the women's. Her 3rd win running and her 5th Wimbledon title. One of the youngest sportswomen of the year was Zara Long, who won a place in Britain's Olympic team at the age of 13. And 15-year-old Kathy Healy became the London Festival Ballet's newest star. She came from New York to star in The Nutcracker and Don Quixote.
I started dancing when I was about 4, and it was never a conscious decision to dance. I just knew that that's what I wanted to do. I saw Rudolf Nureyev in a documentary called I Am a Dancer, and I just flipped out.
For the boys, there was a new soccer school set up by the Football Association. 25 teenagers enrolled for the first term's coaching that they hoped would make them soccer stars of the future. And there were plenty of would-be clowns, jugglers and lion tamers who rolled up to audition for the country's first circus school. Some had novel ideas to make them laugh. Some were disappointed.
Thanks for coming, but you're still a bit too young, you see. Can you come back in about 10 years? We'll make an appointment for you. Off you go now.
Back at ordinary school, children were grappling with the introduction of GCSEs, which replaced the old O-levels. But schools were trying to make life easier with some new methods of teaching Shakespeare. They ranged from a comic book edition of Macbeth to modern translations, with the original text on one page and the up-to-date version opposite. A real-life Prince Hal was born in the same year as you. Harry was the second son of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Also born this year were Britain's first test tube triplets, 2 boys and a girl, who arrived 5 weeks early.
Very appropriate.
5 weeks early. 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 5 weeks early And the Walton family in Liverpool was celebrating the mass christening of Britain's only sextuplets. Their mother was surrounded as she brought out the 6 girls: Hannah, Lucy, Ruth, Sarah, Kate and Jennifer. But 1984 saw the first worries about the environment and the world in which children are growing up. Scientists were becoming more and more anxious about the effects of acid rain on trees and wildlife. It's caused by chemicals released into the air by factory chimneys, and many countries have tightened up controls. One study says that hundreds of lakes in Scotland and Scandinavia have been poisoned. And as Britain suffered from one of its worst ever droughts, the first worries too about global warming and the greenhouse effect. The water level in this reservoir fell so low that it uncovered a village that had been flooded years before. Some health measures were aimed specifically at children. Glue sniffing had become such a problem that the government backed a new law banning the sale of certain solvents to children. And they also launched TV commercials to dissuade children from smoking.
Want to stand out from the crowd without having to smoke? Then Stub is the thing. Stub! Hundreds of dead ends go into each bottle for that unique aroma of stale cigarettes. One splash and you'll smell like a 20-a-day man. Remember, when you smell of Stub, you'll never have problems with girls again.
Finally, the Central Electricity Generating Board found a spectacular answer to fears about the safety of carrying nuclear waste around the country by train. A 14-inch thick steel flask full of nuclear rubbish was laid in the path of a train travelling at nearly 100 miles an hour. The flask was intact, the train was a write-off.
So, that's it, your personal birthday video. We hope you'll want to keep it and come back to it as you grow older, like a family photo album, and maybe even one day show it to your children and grandchildren. As you've seen, lots of important events were happening around the world, but to you, the most important thing was that it was the year when you were born.